Hello, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us at Secular AZ. And again, if you are joining us on the webinar, put your name in the chat. White Christian nationalism is the greatest threat to our democracy, and Secular AZ is your voice for the separation of religion and government. We are a nonprofit organization, and we act as your voice to elected officials all across the state and at every level. So be sure to check out all of our social media channels and like, subscribe, and share. We also have great programming. These Friday updates are pretty amazing, and we have speakers from all walks of life. We have historians, authors, elected officials, journalists, you name it. Next Friday, we are going to be speaking with Eddie Chavez Calderon, who is the campaign director for Arizona Jews for Justice, and he's going to be talking about the excellent work that they do. But today, we are going to be speaking with a local group, AZRSOL. AZRSOL. And can one of you jump in really quick and tell me what that stands for? I should have written it down.
Arizonans for Rational Sex Offense Laws.
Okay, Arizonans for Rational Sex Offense Laws. My bad for not having that written down. But they provide research alongside lived experience for stakeholders and the public to reduce stigma and dissuade fear-based laws and policies. They work with elected officials and other stakeholders to reduce the collateral consequences of overreaching sexual offense policies and offers reentry support and hold monthly fearless support group meetings to create community for those living on the registry and their loved ones. So today we're actually going to start off with it's like a 8.5 minute video. So give me just one moment here to share my screen. I probably should have checked this to make sure it works, but let's check it now. And please, if you could let me know if you can see and hear this. I'm going to click play. Can you hear it? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. No, you can't hear it?
No sound.
No sound. Hold on.
Okay, well, what I think we ought to do with pedophiles, the way I think you ought to
No
punish them
sound?
is I think you ought to lock them in a room with their
There's sound now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks.
parents, child, and hand the parents a ball bat. No windows, and give parents half an hour. And then whatever's left, you can shovel up and throw out the garbage.
You shouldn't be a teacher. You shouldn't be in politics. You should work at McDonald's.
Not if they reoffend, it's when will they reoffend. And I don't want to take that chance.
The state passed 4 bills on the first day of session, designed to make the Sunshine State the most difficult place in the country for sex offenders.
Governor Cuomo has signed legislation that prohibits registered sex offenders from becoming firefighters.
Megan's Law will protect millions of families.
In a few moments, I will sign the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act.
President Obama signed the International Megan's Law bill into law.
Lost audio.
By the fact that they have a frightening and high reoffense rate. As high as 80% of sex offenders reoffend. And that's a frightening and high rate. If 80% of sex offenders reoffend upon release, that would be frightening and certainly very high.
There is a huge disparity between the public's perception of sex offenders and the truth, the empirical, scientific, actuarial truth.
In explaining this frightening and high reoffense rate, Justice Kennedy made reference to a manual published by the United States Department of Justice. The Justice Department manual cites only one thing, an article in Psychology Today, a mass market magazine from 1986. It has no backup data. It has nothing in it that it cites. It's just 80%.
I began working in the field of treating sex offenders in 1978. When I started in the field, there was around 30 or 40 of us. We'd have a conference and we'd all attend and we'd all present. It was a very small world. I work with some of the most dangerous offenders, measuring their sexual response to what we call deviant stimuli with a device called the penile plethysmograph. So if they were getting aroused, we would give them a little shock. We were highly criticized for what we were doing. We were compared to a Clockwork Orange. We wrote an article for Psychology Today that described what we were doing. In that context, we felt it important to say the studies all over the country that had been published to date, and this is back in the 80s, ranged from very low to very high recidivism rates, as high as 80%. That got taken to say all sex offenders recidivate at 80%. That's absolutely incorrect. It's wrong. It's not true. If you're going to base laws at a federal level, you don't cite popular psychology magazines, no matter who the author is, me or anybody else. It's not a scientific journal. I'm appalled that this could happen. This is not my intent. Not my intent at all.
In 1988, I was given an assignment by my employer to research sex offender programs around the country. I couldn't find any, so basically I just made up a model. My original research paper had 6 references, including the dictionary and the paper that Rob Longo did for Psychology Today. The best we were doing was just making a bunch of guesses, but it's there now. There is hardcore scientifically based research.
The recidivism of sex offenders has been studied over and over and over again. One of the most comprehensive studies of recidivism found a recidivism rate among those almost 10,000 sex offenders of 3.5%. There's a study in Maine that had a rearrest rate of 3.9%. A Nebraska study found a 2-year recidivism rate of 1.7%, 1-year recidivism 0.6%. These studies are quite consistent. Criminals of other sorts, property crimes, drug crimes, have higher recidivism rates than sex offenders.
Why would you go to the first things that were ever written when there have been thousands and thousands of articles written since that time? That is deliberate indifference.
There's no doubt that the statements about reoffense rates are wrong. They're just, as a matter of social science fact, those statements are wrong.
At this point, the phrase frightening and high has been cited in close to 100 cases. Legislatures routinely recite it in their preambles to their legislation. They cite the US Supreme Court, which rested its assumptions on nothing.
We've designed these draconian sex offender laws, telling ourselves that the people who are affected by these laws are monsters, the other. The reality is these laws, by severely limiting the ability of offenders to get housing, to get jobs, they are undercutting the ability of the society to reintegrate sex offenders and prevent future sexual violence.
You are now classified as a sex offender. You have been kicked out of college. You're not allowed to use the internet. You're not allowed to live with your dad because he lives too close to a school. Do you think that the punishment fit the crime?
They're throwing thousands of people onto the streets, out of their house, out of school, based on frightening and high, decades of recidivism, 80%, which came from nothing.
What they're saying is they're very dangerous. They're going to hurt us. This fear is exactly the source of these policies about public parks, about libraries, about residency restrictions.
It should be worrisome to all of us to see the protections of the Constitution cast aside because today we're frightened. The question is, what kind of measures do you take to secure yourself against these risks? And at what cost to your society and your values as a society?
All right, let me stop sharing. I can do this. There we go. Stop share. Okay, so. All right, well, I think at this point I am going to be handing it off to Pat. And Pat, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce yourself and the other folks who are on this call so we can learn more about the very important work that you all do. Go ahead.
Well, hello, I'm Patricia Borden. Thank you for the opportunity to share our work with you today. We appreciate your open-mindedness and willingness to engage with this challenging issue. One of the significant problems we aim to address is the prevalence of misinformation and harmful stereotypes surrounding individuals who have committed sexual offenses. A striking example is Justice Kennedy's assertion that 80% of sex offenders reoffend, which has been used to justify harsh laws in Arizona. However, a study by the U.S. Justice Department has found that the actual sex offense reoffense rate is 3.57. AZRSOL is the only nonprofit organization in Arizona that provides education, advocacy, and support to those living on the registry and their loved ones. And we're a proud affiliate of NARSOL, the National Association for Sexual Offense Laws. As the founder and director of AZRSOL, along with my husband Terry, I want to emphasize that our motivation stems from a deep concern for the well-being of families and a commitment to protecting children. We do not condone any sexual offenses. My background as a volunteer for the Task Force for Child Protection's Family Visitor Program in Poughkeepsie, New York, and my husband's experience as a CASA volunteer in Phoenix underscore our dedication to children. However, it was a personal experience that truly transformed our lives and led us to this work. In 2007, my son was charged with sexual crimes against children, despite having no prior legal problems, and he was a model citizen. While he maintained his innocence throughout the trial, and to this day, he was sentenced to 75 years in prison for allegedly touching 3 children over their clothing in public. This experience prompted us to leave our home in Hyde Park, New York, and move to Arizona to be closer to him. I am not here to discuss his case, but I have put a summary of it in the chat. Throughout our weekly visits with our son, we witnessed firsthand the heartbreaking reality faced by inmates who, when released, could not live with their children or even have pictures of them. These children were not their victims. The children were subjected to harsh, barbed wire environments with limited opportunities for comfort and play during visitation. Yet, it was common to have them cry as they would say goodbye to their dads, grandfathers, and uncles. It was this experience that motivated us to establish AZRSOL and work with probation and legislators to create policies that prioritize community safety while preserving family unity. Our work is challenging due to the stigma associated with sexual offenses, but we remain committed to advocating for a more compassionate and evidence-based approach. Those convicted of sex offenses are the new crime du jour. Vicky Campo will now share more about her reasons for volunteering and the specific work we undertake. Vicky?
Vicky, make sure that there you go.
My internet is spotty, so I hope that I stay on screen. My name's Vicky Campo, and I'm the communications director for AZRSOL. One of the reasons that we do this work is, the registry initially was limited to a very small group of serious offenders, and it was accessible only by law enforcement. But over these last 30 years, through these incremental steps, they have expanded the registry again and again in one state after another. And we're now at a place where your child is more likely to be placed on the registry than to be harmed by someone on it. And yet there is not one single study in 30 years that shows any public safety benefit from the registry. And in fact, some studies show that it makes the problem worse. So AZRSOL is here to combat that. My son is a case in point. When he was in college, he had sex with a high school girl. She was the initiator and there was no force or coercion, but he was facing 110 years in prison for that. Because in Arizona, if you have sex with somebody, if you touch their breast, it's 1 count. If you touch their buttocks, it's 2 counts. Use your mouth, it's 3. She touches you, it's 4. And before we knew it, 11 counts, each one with a mandatory minimum of 10 years. My son took a plea for 5 years and is now on lifetime probation and the lifetime sex offender registry. So that's my involvement. What we do, we sort of have a 3-pronged approach to this issue at AZRSOL. First is education. We do things like this phone call today. We do, webinars and presentations and tabling, just trying to correct the narrative. Our advocacy work is with elected officials, other stakeholders, Department of Probation, and any other groups that might work with our population. And we're trying to reduce the collateral consequences. The collateral consequences are, if you could go to prison and come out and live your life, that would be one thing. It would still be bad, but you come out and there is no future. It's game over. You can't get work, you can't get housing, you can't be around people. It's I think Chris will speak more about that. The last thing that we do is we provide support for people who are living on the registry and their families. We have a reentry stipend for those that are coming home from prison to help them get reestablished. We have monthly fearless support group meetings that create community for people on the registry and their loved ones. It's very isolating to be on the sex offender registry. There are many, many places you can't even go. We have a civil commitment visitation program. Sometimes people that they deem to be mentally ill, when their prison sentence is over, they just are civilly committed into a state hospital and they can't get out unless they have these pro-social relationships. So we visit with those folks. And we send roughly 500 holiday cards every year into the prisons. And I don't even know what all Pat does. I can tell you that Pat fields calls all day, every day. I've never seen her without her phone. So, you know, we just try to meet people where they're at. Chris is one of our volunteers and one of our participants, as am I. And so I'll bounce it over to Chris.
I'll unmute myself. Hi, my name's Chris. I served 8.5 years in prison, and I'm on lifetime probation now. I've been on probation for 6 years, and looking to terminate my lifetime probation. I committed a crime, and the collateral consequences are great, not just for me, but for my family. Besides the shame and humiliation of community notification and things like that, this really affects my sons, and I live with both my older sons, 34 and 31. My youngest son was hit by a car about a year before I was released from prison, and suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. So when I got out of prison, about a week later, he was released to the family, and that's basically what I've been doing since I got out, is trying to get him so that he has some semblance of a life, and I'm his caregiver, and so that's what I'm doing right now. But I was told early on that I've got to get a job, and I went on probably close to 35 interviews. And once it came around to, what my conviction was, either I got an email or a polite rejection letter, but so that kind of dashed some of those hopes of using my 25 years as a graphic designer and getting a job in my field. So now those options are really limited. But again, these are all just collateral consequences of my crime. So in dealing with that, I understand. I understood when I signed the plea agreement of those consequences, but the reality of it, once being released from prison, is very different. And I was fortunate, unlike so many, that I had my family support. There are a lot of guys that don't have family and don't have that kind of support, and maybe they're younger and they haven't ever had a job, or a really good job that they wanted to have. So a lot of them are just they're taking whatever they can, and so there's just this lack of hope in general for the future. So when I lent my design skills to AZRSOL, that was a chance for me to kind of give something back to some people that have been supporting me, and just kind of listening to some of the frustrations of being on probation and the things that I can't do. I don't really think the registry does anything, and there's a lot of studies that say that it's not protecting children. And as a father, if anyone harms my children, I certainly want to have them see justice. And I guess my point is I feel like I've served my time. 8.5 years is a long time for an attempted crime, and I just feel like the registry just perpetuates that punishment and that stigma and that ostracism, because once people find out that, oh, this relatively normal looking guy was convicted of a sexual offense, then I don't know what their reaction is going to be, and so that's my constant anxiety of trying to deal with this. And so I'm not, it's not like feel sorry for me, because can't really feel sorry for someone that's committed a crime. You feel like they need to do their time and serve it, but it's got to a point now where they keep introducing new laws and new things that could put my family in danger. My surveillance officer was out yesterday, and then she told me about how in Mesa they had spray painted, names on this guy's house. And, you know, he's got to deal with his insurance, and then another guy, he got his new windows in, you know, very expensive to put new windows in. And some kids came by with a baseball bat and smashed his windows. Because he's on the registry, and, you know, there's people out there that think, you know, I'm going to go, you know, give this person my own justice. So that's all I got.
Well, yeah, it's so much. I have like so many things have popped into my head. So like I even noticed today, you know, I got one of those notifications a few months ago saying, you know, sex, and it's on my refrigerator, right? And I just realized it today. I'd never looked at it since it was sent to my mailbox, but there it is on my refrigerator. Like, what am I going to do exactly? Right? Am I going to change my behavior? Like the first thing I think of here, because I actually have I have a friend who was who made a bunch of really terrible decisions as late in their late teens and early 20s, and were caught up in a big drug sting, and you know, was looking at all of this time, and thankfully we were all able to kind of send letters to the courts. It was a huge grand jury indictment, but she was looking at, you know, I want to say it was so long ago that this happened, almost 20 years ago, but it was you know, decades of time. And the thing that was going on with her specifically was she was no longer using drugs. She had actually gotten clean herself, but before she had sold to an undercover police officer, and that's what elevated her crime so much, right? But and so thankfully, you know, depending on who the judge is, right? Like she was able to then just have probation. Thank goodness, right? And even later she was able to expunge her record. She can vote now and all that kind of stuff. But my understanding here when it comes to folks who are on the sex registry is like that is just not an option. Am I right? Like if
Yes.
so let's talk a little bit about that. Like this is a lifetime designation, correct?
Correct, yeah.
In Arizona, states like I think Colorado and Louisiana, they have if you're on the registry for 10 years, you can petition to get off. 10 years with no other offenses whatsoever. So, but Arizona, it's meant to be lifetime.
Yes, and the other thing is in Arizona, there are two things that we're dealing with, the sex offender registry and lifetime probation. And they generally give 2 terms of lifetime probation to somebody coming out because it is so onerous that people would choose to go back to prison for 5 or 10 years so that when they came out, they'd be off probation. Well, then they started doing 2 terms because then when you come off, you still have another term. So they call it killing your number. And so now you can't kill your number. You have to just serve that lifetime probation. And if you have committed a sexual offense, you can't go to parks, McDonald's, schools, libraries, any public events where children might congregate. In some states, not here,
And wait,
they
let me
are,
Vicky's talking about probation. Those what she's speaking to, those which are terms of probation, not going to, yeah.
yes, that is all part of probation. You can't use the internet. You can't have a smartphone. You cannot be around any children, including your own. My son's parental rights were severed because there was a case against the mother, and they just severed his rights too. He hasn't even seen her since she was an infant. So it's a lot. It's a lot, and it's very difficult to live under that kind of scrutiny.
So, okay, you know, because so to give a little bit of background, I don't remember which home tour or street festival it was, but Vicky stopped by the secular AZ booth and we started talking a little bit about you know, what this looks like. And so I was like, this is a great conversation for us to have, because and I want you to tell me if what I'm saying, if what I'm asking here is correct, but it does seem like perhaps because of our kind of puritanical views on sex and sexuality in the United States, that has something to do with the harsh sentencing and this lifetime probation requirement and the sexual predator registry. I mean, what are your thoughts? Where does this come from?
I think you're right. I don't mean to, step on anyone else's toes if you guys want to answer, but yes, I think it is partly our puritanical nature. It's, you know, a war on sex, really. I mean, unless you are married and doing it missionary style, it almost feels like it's part of the movement against, LGBTQ. And yeah, I do believe that it is part of this whole puritanical and this punishment. I don't understand, the whole religious concept of freedom, of forgiveness, and yet they don't want to forgive anybody when it comes to criminal justice reform.
Yeah, and go ahead, Pat. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I personally think that the stories that capture everyone, the stories like the Adam Walsh Act or Megan, just to name a few.
Mhm.
When, as a parent, you I can't think of the other Adam. I can't think of the other name, but no, Patty Wetterling's son, Jacob Wetterling. Okay, so when Jacob Wetterling was killed and by someone who had committed sexual offenses, his mom went to the police and asked what we should do to prevent this. So her intentions were really good, and she did not want this to happen to any other child. So she fought tirelessly to have the Jacob Wetterling Act. And that was the first registry. And that registry, initially, the intentions were to keep it just for the police, not to keep it out there for the public.
Oh.
Today, Patty Wetterling is an advocate against it because she sees the harm that's done to children as young as 7 years old on the registry, or the effects of their loved ones going to prison and then coming out and being homeless and all that. So that was the first federal law. And then they've had add-ons. Well, the Megan's Law. Well, if they had only sent out flyers to the neighbors then would have known, and they would have protected their child. But the fact of all this is that 97% of the crimes happen by someone not on the registry. So we want to pretend that we're keeping our children safe by having these laws. But the fact is that 97% of these offenses happen by people that the children know, the families know. So the laws do nothing to protect them.
And meanwhile, here in Arizona, a few months ago, there was just a big case about, the courts upheld this clergy protection, right? So at the same time that you said children as young as 7 years old having to go on this lifetime registry, we've got priests and elders in the Mormon church or wherever that just get a pass for that's the part that is really upsetting. Well, and then Mars in the chat, early on in the chat, pointed out, somebody could be put on this registry. Is this true? Somebody could be put on the registry for public urination?
Yes. Public urination for
if it's in front of a minor.
Yeah, I mean, or a second of time. Yeah, but that is true.
And
But
that,
consensual sex among teenagers is probably the biggest group. The age at which the highest number of sexual offenses are committed is age 14. 14. And these people are being put on the registry. And let me just give you one example. Ryan Browning, 17 years old, met a young girl, a 14-year-old girl at a party. They fell in love. They started a sexual relationship. And when he turned 18, her parents called, and he is on the registry for life. And by the way, they're in love and living together now and want to have a child together and get married.
wow. Okay. So, you know, and I mean, I can also kind of like maybe trying to understand, like, okay, you find out that your child is sexually active and that it's upsetting, you know, but, you know, to take it that far and they're still together and like, so I guess my next question would be, could they remove those like, could those parents have made the decision, like, we made a mistake, they're happily married, they want to have children. Can we get this off the, like, no.
No, once the charges are made, it's just taken on by the prosecution. And yeah, maybe you guys want to answer. I feel like I'm answering everything.
There's only, in Arizona, there's only one mechanism to get off the registry. And it's very limited. And I don't know the exact details, but the person had to have been a minor when they committed the offense and not have reoffended, and then can apply when they're 25. We know somebody who didn't reoffend, but who violated his parole. That precluded him from getting off the registry. You know, we know that in Arizona, there is absolutely no mechanism to get off the registry. We have tried to get a sponsor for a bill to allow people to get off the registry. Like Chris was saying before, there are states that have laws that you can petition the courts after 10 or 20 years or whatever. But for right now, there's nothing in that, and there is nothing in Arizona.
So my question then is, so what are your like what would be your hope? I mean, like, obviously you can't make change overnight. Also, like, this is a topic that I imagine people from both sides of the aisle are going to avoid because everybody wants to be perceived as somebody who is hard on, you know, child sexual predators, though that may not necessarily be what happened in each of these particular cases. So I guess I have a lot of questions going on right now. First of all, have you been able to find any sponsors to help you move any kind of incremental legislation through our House Senate here in Arizona?
No, and it's not from the lack of trying.
It's not a win politically for anybody to come out and place us in a positive frame of mind.
It's not a win, and the Democrats will say, you know, ask a Republican, and you ask the Republican, and the Republican will say to you, have you asked Rachel Mitchell, the Maricopa County attorney, to bless this? And the answer is she will not bless anything that has to do with sexual offenses. And Steve,
and let me mention one, if you don't mind, I'd like to mention one other thing. What Pat says is absolutely true, but you mentioned sex trafficking. And sometimes they will introduce these bills going against sex traffickers. And we think, well, that's a different story. Yes, of course. We don't want these guys in basements taking pictures of little children. But if your 16-year-old daughter sends a photo of herself to her boyfriend, that is sex trafficking. If you, yeah, any of that. So there are people who you think, oh, well, he's a sex trafficker, he must be bad. No, it could be your daughter. And if that boyfriend shares the picture, there you go. You know, I met with a woman for lunch whose son was actually a victim. And the man who was abusing him sent him an image, and the FBI was tracking that image, and he ended up on the registry.
Well, and yeah, like
Because
that's,
he didn't report it.
yeah, and that, that's another thing that I think about too is, how frequently, as some of these bills come through the state legislature, and we will be looking at them like, hey, but the way that this bill is written, the person who's being sex trafficked is now culpable and could, like there's so many blind spots, I feel like, gosh, my mind is like going crazy. So first,
Let me say 3 more things.
go ahead, go ahead.
One is we have 2 ballot initiatives. Well, not ballot, we have a ballot initiative about sex trafficking coming up, and it will target victims. It is not a good bill, and it's going to need to be voted down. The other thing is Rachel Mitchell, our county attorney, is being primaried this term. So she is a sex crimes prosecutor, and she has been extremely aggressive. In fact, a local church had a group, a support group for sex offenders, and Rachel Mitchell called the insurance company and said, do you know you have sex offenders meeting on this property? And they stopped the program. So yeah, I don't know. So we need to get Rachel Mitchell out of office. We need to defeat this sex offense bill, the sex trafficking bill. And we have a conference coming up pretty soon here that I'm going to drop in the chat in September, that we hope to really engage folks and try to set a new course for these laws.
Okay. So what would be, I'm curious, like, well, first of all, let me read some of these comments here. Mars comments, I used to work for a profit that used volunteers as mentors for children. I had to check the local registry, but nothing in other states. So how helpful is that? They would have to get a fingerprint clearance card. So hopefully that process does a better job of screening. So that's more of a comment. The clergy is supposed to be mandatory reporters, but are they? Does confessional privilege still override that? And Lindsay answered yes. A Supreme Court ruled that in 2023. Goes on to say actual confession of abuse can just be ignored. Prison reform in general is needed. Maybe sex offense can be brought into that. We don't do much to rehabilitate residents in prisons. Boy, ain't that the truth. Oh, excellent. Yes. Thank you for putting up the conference. That's great. Oh, good. And somebody just signed up for the conference. Even better.
Thank you.
Okay, and then there's a couple comments here too. Elizabeth in the Q&A says it's the hellfire and brimstone version of Christianity. Absolutely. And then she also says we're so horrified at the really egregious sexual assaults. Lawmakers scramble to make citizens feel safe without considering the repercussions. Yes, like I think of like that horrible guy, Brock Turner, right? The guy who was convicted of sexual assault, but and it was behind a dumpster, 2 bicycle riders,
Right, yeah.
The whole thing. That is who we want to be legislating against, like people like him. But because of his connections, he spent maybe 3 months in jail or something like that. Those are the people that we really want to see behind bars so they can't do it again. Or, we want to see the clergy who are protecting actual abusers in Bisbee, and the link was thrown into the chat there too. Like, those are the people who need to pay, not somebody who maybe on a drunken night back in the 90s on Mill Avenue after seeing the Gin Blossoms peed in an alleyway. You know what I mean? Like, that's not who needs to be there. The young couple who makes the stupid mistake of sending pictures to each other. That's not who we want to see. So what would you like if you could? Obviously, this isn't something that's going to happen overnight or, anytime soon even. But if you could make one small change, what would that small legislative change, statutory change, what would you like to see happen?
Well, right now, you have the opportunity to put a comment on the Superior Court's calendar and Vicky might have to help me with this. There are people, we're on the Restorative Justice Coalition in Arizona. And what this would do is someone commits a crime, there should be some sort of mediation. Believe it or not, all victims do not believe that people should go to prison for life. There's so many complicated reasons for it, oftentimes they're relatives. So if we had a restorative justice approach to have the victim weigh in and say what they thought the punishment, whatever, should be, that would be a very positive step. That would be in my opinion. It's not going to answer all of the problems, but definitely, it's definitely going to help. Did someone put that in the chat? It looks like no. Yeah. So yeah, if you can make a comment, to weigh in, to think if someone is charged with it's any offense, instead of going right to court, there be some kind of mediation where the prosecutor, the defendant, and the victim can talk about how they see it being resolved.
I'd like to see a path to get off of the registry, obviously. I mean, I'd rather not have to move to Colorado to achieve that goal. I like it here. My sons, we've been here for 30 years. So, this is home for me, but it's getting so onerous that I just don't,
Yeah,
And
you're
I
just
mean,
so stifled. And one other thing that I think would be helpful is comprehensive sex education. People on the front end need to know, what does it mean to consent? What actually will land me on the sex offender registry? Kids don't know, and really teach kids about relationships. I was just talking about this on the drive up here. My friend and his son, they have two 17-year-old boys. I said, please explain to them about sexual offenses. And they're like, oh yeah,
yeah, I and again, it's that puritanical approach to sex and sexuality that keeps us that creates bad policies like this I just last week I went to the Peoria Unified School District Board meeting, and unfortunately there was an actual sexual predator at one of the high schools, Peoria High School, and this guy, he's like a bit of a local celebrity, called himself Mr. Orange and put orange paint on him for Suns games. So not only was he a basketball coach in a public school where those kids looked up to him, right? But there was that added layer of power and that power dynamic. Like, I bet he could probably get kids tickets to a Suns game. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it was so interesting at this board meeting because everybody was upset, obviously, about this guy, and we all want him and the accomplice at that school to pay whatever price it is. But more importantly, because Peoria doesn't have any access to sex ed, not even, like abstinence only sex ed. They've taken away a parent's ability to opt in to a sex ed program. So those children didn't have the vocabulary to be able to identify that predatory behavior, so all these, churchgoers who are being activated at their local church to show up at the board meeting and be angry about things, what they really would probably be advocating for, if their puritanical beliefs didn't get in the way, would be comprehensive sex ed, because every study shows that is how we can keep our kids safe. And like you said, not only safe from predators, but from having predatory behavior themselves or getting themselves in trouble. Like, if kids don't know math, what do? We teach it to them, right? Yep. So if they don't know how to advocate for themselves and articulate their boundaries and consent, then we are keeping them unsafe. And I don't understand why anybody would want to do that.
Again, your child is more likely to be placed on the sex offender registry than to be harmed by someone on it. That is absolutely frightening to me. Frightening to me that your child will be labeled a predator for the rest of his or her life.
We when I
mean-
was a teacher at a Title I school, there was a young woman who was a handful, to be sure. And and I knew exactly why she was a handful, because her home life was horrible. And so, she always needed attention. And one day this is way back during flip phones even, but she had her flip phone, and her best friend, she flipped up her best friend's skirt and took a picture of it with her phone, sent it to all the other kids in 8th grade. And thankfully, the other little girl who was her best friend, her parents were so angry, and we basically had to talk them down. Like, it was already guaranteed that she was probably, that was the compromise. We essentially had to expel this little girl, right? But we also had to talk to the parents and say, please don't, let's not, she made a big mistake, and we don't want either of them to get into trouble. And but that's the kind of education we need, because otherwise that little girl would have been on the sex registry at the age of 14 for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The article that got dropped in the chat, what if a sex offender moved in next door? It goes into a lot of detail about the statistics. It cites some studies and things like that about this issue. So if you're interested, it's also on our blog, on our website. We've got a lot of good information, articles and studies there. So.
Oh, good. And Lindsay's on top of it, and she's throwing everything in the chat. A few more comments here. Vicky's right on the mark. 18-year-olds need to know the consequences of these puritanical laws. Yes, like sex. Let's take all taboo away from sexual discussions, and let's just talk about it. When my kids were little, we used all the correct body parts, and had all the conversations. We just normalized it because it's normal. Our sexuality is normal, no matter how much people try to say that it's somehow evil. It's just not. Let's see. My daughter is 18 and her boyfriend is in high school. We checked the Romeo and Juliet law as soon as she turned 18. Smart. Lee says that Tyler Camp, candidate for Maricopa County Sheriff, believes in restorative justice. Excellent. I'm a big fan of restorative justice myself, and often would use restorative practices in my classroom whenever we had some kind of drama or turmoil. And in middle school, there's all kinds of drama. So it works really well. I appreciate you all doing that work. And while Lee is advocating for Tyler Camp, I just want to remind everybody that we are a nonpartisan organization and we don't endorse anybody. So it is 12:54, and I'd like to honor everybody's time here. First of all, I think this is a really, really important discussion. We need to take taboo away. And I love that your advocacy for restorative justice and comprehensive sex ed is kind of overlapping here, because those are all things that really go hand in hand. So this has got to be really tough work that you do, and especially considering your own personal journeys with your family members and loved ones. It's got to wear on you, certain days. So to end us today, I guess my question is, what is it that how do you keep hope? How do you maintain hope? And I'll start with Vicky first.
Oh, that's not a very good question for me right now. My son is facing additional charges, probation's trying to revoke him, and I'm in a pretty dark place. Every time you have a touch point with the police, there's a risk with probation, with the system. Honestly, it's the work I do. It's AZRSOL. Pat Borden, when my son was arrested, I called Pat first phone call, and 30 minutes later, here she comes up my driveway with dinner. Really, if we can't support one another, we got nothing. Nothing. I feel like I'm on the registry. Honestly, I feel like I'm going to cry right now. That's how it is.
Well,
That's how it is every day for every one of us.
I get it. And don't, maybe after this, I hope you can go out to the beach and find a
I will
margarita.
go out to the beach and I will drink a margarita.
There you go. Vicky's joining us from Mexico. Thank goodness. How about you, Pat? What gives you hope?
Well, what I think Vicky kind of touched on this a little bit. It really is a struggle day to day. Some days are better than others. But on the days that we get the most hope are the letters, the emails, the phone calls from guys, especially the ones in prison, thanking us for our work. They say to us, we give them so much hope. So it's kind of like, it's that type of stuff that gives me hope. It's that kind of stuff.
And sorry, I'm just over here looking at your website and your registration here for I'm gonna take a look at that more. Maybe we'll see about getting an exhibitor table for that conference.
Oh, wow, that we would
I
love,
would love
we would
that.
love that, yeah.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that. We'll, at our next staff meeting, we'll put that on the agenda.
Okay.
And then,
Excellent.
and then finally for you, Chris, what's something that gives you hope?
Like Vicky, it's hard. I had a lot of hope when I was released, but that was met with reality. I felt somewhat deluded in that, people might be accepting, but it's been a difficult road. So what I really hope is that we can get more people to do the request to speak, and when these things start to come up, we get family members and just other people that maybe aren't angry to say, hey, I know somebody that this is affected and this is going too far, that sort of thing. But I'm in the position of, I don't feel great about myself, so it's hard to have a lot of hope. My son, his recovery, learning to walk again, that is my source of hope, and just my older son has been so helpful to me, and just being my son, and so it's hard to have hope about the future when you don't know what's coming at you next. So
yeah, I can
I
imagine.
want to share a story. Pat and I had lunch with a guy not too long ago who has been on on probation for 25 years, completely hopeless. He was suicidal, and we think that these probation officers are here to help us reintegrate. He went to his probation officer and said, I'm suicidal, I'm hopeless, I don't know what to do. And she said, quit playing the victim. Quit victim posturing. Yeah. So yeah, it made me go home and cry. It really did. It really struck me.
So, okay. And I can tell you that this group right here, I know that there's a lot of people on this group who have an RTS account. If you don't, you can reach out to us, and I prefer you reach out to CEBV because I don't go to the Capitol as often as I used to. But there are a lot of people here. So so I'm last question, I guess. I'm assuming you probably have a mailing list here, right? Like we could probably get on your mailing list on your website, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah.
And then do you send out like notifications like, hey, there's this bill and we need everybody to sign in to RTS. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is definitely, maybe that is something that can give you all a little bit of hope, because these are folks here on this call who will go on Sunday evenings, take a look at what's happening at the legislature, and they will weigh in on RTS. So at the very least, we can, get signed up for one more newsletter, folks, so that we can support the work that it's AZRSOL. Yes, the AZRSOL does. All right, and it's nothing but kudos. Oh, there is one question here. What is the bill number is there still a bill number right now that's going through the legislature?
it's already been approved.
I think
Okay.
it's already been signed.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So at the very least, we can get all signed up on your newsletter so we know exactly what we want to RTS for 2025. maybe in 2025, we'll have a legislature that actually can do something instead of just gridlock all the time. So
That would be lovely.
yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I hope you all have a great weekend. I know that you've given me some hope to know that there are folks out there like you who are doing work in this space, which I imagine is probably some dirty, thankless work. So thank you for doing that dirty, thankless work for the rest of us. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for hearing
you.
us out. We appreciate it.
It was our pleasure. All right, everybody. Have a great weekend and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.